Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome back, everyone, to day two. If you just joined before I drop the note in the chat, we are going to get started in just a few minutes. I want to give an opportunity for folks to jump online. All right, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome back to day two of the CAM workshop. It is 4 past the hour, so in the interest of time, I want to go ahead and get started. It looks like a good majority of you have come back for day two, and I'm sure that some others will join as the meeting goes along. So just want to start off today with giving you an overview of the things that we're going to cover today. From yesterday, a brief recap, we had an opportunity to kind of lay the foundation, give you all an overview of CAM, what its purpose is, some brief history here, also lay out some of the expectations from a national perspective, and then how we've implemented those things here locally. Yesterday, we talked about some of the funding that is available and the eligibility around that, laid out some stuff around the RFQ timelines, and then we talked about those 4 core elements: access, assess, prioritize, and refer. So today we are going to spend our day in our time together covering a few topics. We're going to go a little bit deeper into some of the data and technology. So I know some questions came up yesterday about how Southwest is able to do and accomplish some of the things that they do in terms of all of the coordination that needs to happen, some of the scheduling that needs to take place, things of that sort. And so they currently utilize some different data and technology. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more, talk about some of the HMIS expectations. We'll go into depth around some of the additional services that Southwest provides. So in addition to those 4 core elements that HUD requires. Locally, there are some things that either our state partners, our city partners, or just our COC partners in general require or have asked of CAM to provide. And so we'll go into detail around some of those services. CAM is recently implementing some YHDP, or Youth Homeless Demonstration Program funding. And so we'll talk in depth about what that means for CAM and any new lead agency. We'll talk about some of those partnerships. We mentioned yesterday some of the referral partners, which is our shelters, our transitional housing, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing partners. But there's also some formal partnerships that CAM has entered into, maybe an MOU or MOA with. And so we want to talk a little bit about those partnerships. Questions came up yesterday about staffing. And so we're going to go into depth and talk about staffing, what is currently the staffing structure. Also talk a little bit about like optimally what we would like to see for staffing. We'll talk a little bit about, just the structure in general. As I mentioned yesterday, CAM is not just a program, right? It is a major part in the front door of our homeless crisis response system. And so as such, any organization that is going to implement CAM has to be aware of that, and also has to think about how it then fits into their organization, right? And then lastly, we'll talk about some resources that we have prepared to helpfully help you all get your planning going. So there are a few different resources, and they're all posted on our website, but we'll also have a little overview of some of them as well. And we hope these resources will be helpful for you all as you start your planning process today, because I want to make sure, and I emphasized this yesterday, but want to emphasize again, please don't wait until the RFQ is released in order to start your planning process. The partnerships that you need to develop, the things that you may have to consider, maybe even run up the chain in your organization, that application process probably won't allow enough time for you to do all of those things. So that's the goal of these couple of days in this workshop, is really to get you all a jump start on your process. And then lastly, we'll have a Q&A. But you can also feel free to drop questions in the chat box. And periodically, if we're ahead of schedule, we may pause along the way and take some live questions as well. And so we do have some folks that are monitoring the chat box, and either we'll be responding directly, or we'll take note of that question if we don't have the answer immediately, and we will be publishing Q&A document following this. And so this is being recorded just as yesterday, and so we will share the recordings. We will also, like I said, share the Q&A document as well as the slides. So with that being the case, I want to go ahead and move out the way and turn our presentation over to some of our experts. So we have some team members here from HAND that will get started with the presentation. And then we also have our current CAM implementing agency, or lead agency, which staff, I believe, is Scott and Ed, are on the call today. And so they'll be providing some of the presentation as well. So Kiana, I'll turn things over to you to get us kicked off.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get into CAM's role in HMIS data collection and reporting, I want to just give a brief introduction to the system. And it's really not an introduction for many of you, though it may be for some, but just a little bit of a reminder about the system that is required to be used. As many of you know, HMIS, also Homeless Management Information System, is our data system that we are using to record and analyze client services and housing data for individuals and families in our COC that are experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. HMIS ties together homeless service providers within kind of a data community to help create a more coordinated and effective housing and service delivery system. The HMIS data standards is kind of like the Bible. Okay, it's the Bible for HMIS. It is published by HUD. It is updated every other year. in collaboration with federal partners. And the purpose of the standard is to really make sure data is the same and standardized across the country in the way that things are being collected, the actual elements that are being collected on the individuals that we are serving. We have a link here that you all will receive for the most recent HMIS data standards, as well as some historical archive of those data standards that we'll be able to share on this link if you are interested in some of those details. Thank you. So CAM's role is huge in HMIS data collection and reporting in Detroit. Data entered by CAM is shared to other agencies participating in our community-wide sharing plan. It is the basis for the shared client record. So it is the beginning. Shelter and housing providers are reliant on CAM for referrals, and these are often created in HMIS. Shelter navigators rely on CAM for initial assessment and data entry, some pieces of navigation, processing housing packets, and coordination around referrals. Case managers rely on CAM data to know where the clients are. What is happening with the clients as they go through this process into getting housing? And then the CLC funders in hand rely on CAM to have data, to have quality data for system program planning purposes. Before we move on to the next slide, I just want to really express that CAM plays a critical role. It is so critical in Detroit's data collection and reporting in an effort to help minimize the data entry burden on shelters and reduce the number of time clients need to keep retelling their story. Client level data capture in HMIS by CAM is shared to other agencies participating in our COC sharing. So it is the crux, it is kind of the beginning, and it's very important that that data is collected as accurate as possible so that the receiving agencies can do their part to carry the client further through the process. It really is the basis for everything that we're doing and tracking from the beginning to the end of the client's experience. I'm going to turn it over now to Scott, and he will discuss other data systems that CAM is using, as well as reporting that is critical for this role.
Thanks, Kiana, and hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So as Kiana said, really HMIS, I would say, is right. It's the system of record. It's driving the information that we're capturing for the whole homelessness response and for system and for clients to be tracked throughout the system. However, we've found at CAM as the lead agency that there is benefits into having additional systems to manage that work. So while HMIS is really that system of record, how do we use that information to track people throughout the coordinated entry process and manage our day-to-day work and coordination? We've found benefit in having a system that we're using, as you can see on the slide. Prior to Salesforce, we were, I'd say, kind of in a setup where we were using HMIS. And then in addition to HMIS, we had a multitude of Excel spreadsheets that we were using to track various parts of the coordinated entry process. So we had a spreadsheet for our coordination with the navigation teams. We had spreadsheets for all of the prioritization lists. We had Excel spreadsheets for all of the by name lists. So there was a fair amount of duplication in terms of data entry and where data was stored to go into our work as CAM. And so we moved towards implementing Salesforce to have one system to centralize those workflows. And so you can see on the slide, some of the work that we do out of Salesforce is our navigation, scheduling, and tracking. So as folks are entering the homelessness system, in addition to HMIS, we're also putting data into Salesforce and then coordinating with community and home supports to coordinate with them so they can have information in terms of where clients are at, what shelter they're at, scheduling so that the navigators can go and meet with them, CHS uses the platform also for kind of their tracking of their navigation work. And then as folks complete navigation, we're also then managing all of the prioritization lists for housing referrals out of Salesforce, including as street outreach is navigating folks and they submit folks over to us, then we're putting that information into Salesforce so that folks can be added to the list. We also do diversion tracking in Salesforce, the prevention assessment. We do referrals to our workforce partners, and then all of our call center data and reporting is in Salesforce. So I'd say, as we talked about yesterday, certainly Salesforce is not the only, potential solution to manage the work of coordinated entry, but it is the solution that we have built out where a lot of the work and coordination is happening in terms of like operationalizing our work as CAM in conjunction with HMIS. And so I think it'll be a really key consideration for any potential future lead agency in the COC in terms of managing all of these workflows and data and where that happens, whether that be potentially Salesforce transitioning over or if a new system is developed at some point. I think there's just a lot that goes into that, and certainly happy to answer questions or speak to more details if that's desired. So Salesforce, I'd say, is like the biggest system in addition to HMIS that we're using, but the other really primary system is Vonage Contact Center. So as we talked about yesterday at the start of the pandemic, CAM went fully to phone-based services. We had an initial provider that we used, but then we eventually switched over to Vonage Contact Center, which is a internet-based phone contact center. So our whole administration of the phone line is set up in the contact center, as well as then for our intake staff, they're actually taking calls, and that's integrated into Salesforce. So they're taking the calls in Salesforce through a web-based phone. And I put just a brief data point on here so you could see, to get a general sense, in 2022, through the first 3 quarters, we had over 40,000 calls that were directed to CAM staff. And there was actually a significantly higher amount of calls into the phone line itself, but we use kind of the phone tree to try and screen to a certain extent and route people to external services if they're calling for reasons CAM can't assist with. So yeah, the Vonage Contact Center is a huge part of our day-to-day operations right now, as we're currently fully phone-based in terms of access services. And then I also listed just a number of other systems that we're using. So Southwest Solutions as a whole uses the Microsoft 365 suite. So that's, I'd say, just the day-to-day doing business at an organization, but there are specific CAM processes that we use through this as well. So for instance, in our coordination with partners for receiving from housing programs when they have vacancies, that's all done through Microsoft Forms that come into us. We also have WordPress to manage our CAM website, which we use as a communication tool. We use MailChimp for the newsletter. So I imagine a lot of organizations have these same tools or similar tools that they use, but I did want to mention there is specific pieces of the CAM leads works that we're using these systems for. I think we can jump to the next slide. Okay, so as Kiana mentioned, I think a big piece of coordinated entry is the role that we play in reporting in a number of different areas. I think this is also well supported by HUD. If you look at the coordinated entry guidebook, they really speak to the role coordinated entry can play in system coordination and in data, because it is the front door to homeless services and tracking folks throughout the system. There's kind of a key role CAM can play in providing data to inform systems change and what is happening on the ground. So I called out just a few different areas where this is happening and what reporting looks like for us. So on the left-hand side, we have internal reporting. So I'd say we're using Salesforce and Vonage Contact Center in particular to kind of track day-to-day what's happening from kind of a management perspective, what call metrics are looking like, what intakes are looking like, identifying, training opportunities for staff and making sure we are providing the services we're designed to serve. There's also a significant bucket of work for data cleanup and reconciliation. We have a significant number of people coming through CAM, and that generates a ton of data. And as Keanu is speaking to, that's very extensive in terms of HMIS, and it's very critical for the homelessness response system as a whole, because it's really the starting point of identifying folks in the system and capturing the information that then will be shared with providers throughout the system. So we have dedicated staff working using HMIS reports, as well as reports out of Salesforce to try and make sure we aren't missing folks, to correct data that might happen. I think with the amount of data entry that's happening up front, we definitely recognize there can be errors. And so we try and have processes to then make sure we're also capturing and reviewing that on the back end. HAND has also implemented quarterly audits, I know, for providers throughout the systems, but there's specific components that go into that for coordinated entry. And then we also are doing, data cleanup in kind of specific areas. So for instance, there's a whole specific workflow for veteran data and making sure folks are moving through that process correctly. So there's specific reporting that goes into that to make sure that's accurate. And then I would say another bucket, of course, is funder reporting. So required reporting that's going to be a part of grants. So both the HUD CE grants. Currently, Southwest has a grant from the city of Detroit for diversion. Through the MISHDA funding, there's audits that have to happen around HCVs. So those are just a few examples of that, required reporting that will come with the funding. And then I think the other really big piece is the system reporting. I think, as I was speaking to briefly earlier, CAM has the system level data, so it's not an individual program, really able to see, across the system, how many folks are entering, what are housing referrals looking like, other areas like that, to get a sense of what's happening on the ground. And so we do quarterly reports as well as an annual report. We help provide some information to HAND for the overall homeless system annual report. And I'd say along with that, there's a lot of ad hoc reporting that happens where we have specific requests come in for system data. So for instance, the other week, someone from the city of Detroit was like, hey, can you share with me how many unsheltered households were referred to rapid rehousing in 2021? And I'd say we get a pretty high frequency of requests like that to try and understand kind of what's happening in the system, and providing that data to inform policies and program level decisions. And I believe I'm passing it back over to Kiana.
Yes, I just have one small piece of information to share. It's one slide back. The real important piece here is one slide forward. Thank you. Is just make sure you're planning for your data and technology needs. I don't think anything we've stated here today was new information, maybe for some of you, but it is critical. All of the things that Scott reviewed and myself, it's a lot of time and effort that needs to be put into figuring out what your data team is going to look like. It cannot be an afterthought. It has to be something you're planning for. There's a significant data entry requirement, and at the top end, at the very front, there are some estimations here for the length of time it takes for folks to enter the data. We also have some data quality pillars here to share that you can review when you get these slides, but these are all critical when operating the CAM. And the last but not least piece is staffing considerations. When they get to that staffing section of this presentation, you need to be thinking about who is going to do your data, not just data entry, but who is going to analyze the data, do reporting for you, and manage that piece for your organization. I'm going to turn it on over now to Vicki for additional services.
Thank you, Kiana. I'd like to start by talking about the HARA. It's the Housing Assessment and Resource Agency. HARA is an agency that receives emergency solutions grant funding from the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, or MISTA. It coordinates services within the community's CE system, such as prevention, rapid rehousing, and coordinated entry. HARAs work with other service providers to ensure that access to homeless resources are optimized and based on assessment of need. Because CAM serves as the HARA in the Detroit COC, Continuum of Care, they provide centralized intake and housing assessment to assure a comprehensive community-wide service and housing delivery system. They practice shelter diversion and work to rapidly rehouse people who are homeless. Staff members are employed to function as housing resource specialists. These specialists not only work to ensure rapid rehousing, but also develop a culture that teaches and makes decisions based on outcomes. They practice strength-based case management and work with the COC to ensure quality service delivery. They also enter client information in the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS. They routinely review and correct HMIS data quality issues, as Kiana was just talking about, monitor outcome performance, and provide services and or make referrals to appropriate service agencies as needed. Generally, HARAs are also required to submit quarterly consolidated annual performance and evaluation reports that address specific performance outcomes supported by HMIS data to the grant fiduciary as outlined in the Emergency Solutions Grant Contract. CAM's responsible also for maintaining the HPHCV, EHV, moving up, and DHC waitlist management. These are the housing choice vouchers and so forth. CAM's responsible for maintaining these waitlists through partnerships with MISTA and the Detroit Housing Commission, as well as providing coordination when clients are pulled from the waitlist. I will now turn it over to Ed, who will cover prevention and diversion. Ed?
Good afternoon, everybody. So prevention is something that we work in partnership with Wayne Metro and Matrix Human Services, who are the providers for this program. So when we have an individual calling in for shelter to the CAM hotline, our assessors, eligibility specialists engage them and work on diversion initially. If they are successfully diverted and there is talk about possible assistance with first month security deposit, stuff like that, and they're able to go stay with a family or friend for, and we're given a time frame of 14 days or less, we look at a possible, referring them to prevention based on openings that providers may have. So what we do is once they complete their initial assessment and divert them successfully, we mark them as seeking prevention in Salesforce. And then we have a couple members of our team that do an engagement, usually within the week, following day or two, more than likely. And then we have a prevention assessment of about 7 to 10 questions, somewhere in that range, about different areas of topic. And based on that is an automatic scoring that would either make them eligible for mainstream resources, light touch, or I forget exactly what the third one is. But light touch would be maybe up to 3 months of rental assistance along with it. A little bit more intensive, maybe a little bit longer than that. So we do use that to determine eligibility, and then when the provider's contact with potential openings, we refer based on criteria that we have. So diversion is the first step of any phone call we receive of clients seeking shelter. It is the first conversation we have, regardless if there are openings in shelter or there are not openings. What we're ultimately looking to do with shelter beds is save them for the people who are in direct need tonight, not somebody who may have somewhere to go for, a couple days or even longer, or even for the night. Since beds are extremely limited, we want to reserve those beds for people who may be on the streets, a vehicle, abandoned car park, so on and so on. So it is a problem-solving approach to help people identify a safe space. Now, CAM does work on everyone has a safe place for the night. So diversion, depending on if you're aware of it now, or if you've been aware of it, some people look at it as more long-term, moving straight into housing and out of the homeless system. We adapted here a little bit of a different way of looking at it, and more short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Short-term being for a night or a week, maybe. Medium, maybe we're able to help them, find out, help with first month security, and then their house for another year, or even long-term, which is they never return back to the homeless system. So it could be different few things. So there's also, as we said, short-term diversion where we have a little bit more financial assistance to assist people with. So one of the things we talk about is Greyhound tickets. So if somebody has a family or friend that they can stay with, we'll assist them with purchasing a Greyhound ticket. Now, we do need to confirm with that family or friend for actually any of these assistance type that they are able to stay there for more than one night. Usually we're looking, especially for Greyhound, permanent or at least 90 days actually. Grocery and gas cards. So for grocery, we have both vouchers, and we found that you can also buy cards on Walmart's website. So we do use both different ways. Gas cards, we have not been able to find where you can buy gas cards online. So we do have those as hard copies, where we'll hand out up to $30 for a diversion at a time. And then, as I said, I discussed assisting moving costs and a utility rate. I can't say that word today. I'm sorry. But yeah, that's prevention and diversion. So they're more problem solving, trying to divert people out of the homeless system instead of entering shelter and unsheltered space. And next slide.
I believe I'm going to pick up here to continue talking through things. So another, I'd say, big area of work is the by name list management work. So CAM currently is responsible for managing and coordinating the veteran by name list, the chronic by name list, and this is still in the works, and we'll talk a bit more about it, but also the youth by name list. So to take a quick step back, I'm not sure how familiar folks are with kind of the BNL model, but this is really like a national model. And the idea being with the by name list that you have a current list of everyone currently experiencing homelessness that's updated in real time, so that on the client level, you can know what is happening and coordinate as a system to get folks moved into housing as quickly as possible. And by knowing everyone by name, you know where they're at in the system. They're not just a data point, but we can really coordinate and work together to move things forward. And on the community level, to then have a big picture view of what's happening and what the progress is happening as a community. A lot of this has really been driven in the veteran front. Detroit is a Built for Zero community through community solutions. And there's been a lot of attention and dedication on work to end veteran homelessness. And CAM's role in that is the by name list coordination. And so that includes management of the list itself, tracking folks as they're entering the system, as they're exiting the system, managing, there's a veteran assessment in HMIS, managing all of the referrals to veteran providers, which has a specific process that's different than the general population process. So it's, I'd say, quite an extensive amount of work that the veteran by name list coordinator is doing. We're also managing the chronic by name list. Currently, we have one staff person that's handling the veteran and chronic work, which I don't think is ideal. But there's a similar idea, right? To know at any point in time how many folks are experiencing chronic homelessness, and then to coordinate as a system to move those folks forward to housing, identify barriers, work collaboratively to address those. And then we'll speak a little bit more about the youth by name list, as that's something that's new emerging out of YHDP. And then we also have on this slide training. So I'd say, I think, the CAM and coordinate entry is functions may be different than a lot of programs that homeless service providers are providing, as it, I think, as we've spoken to, really is a process and a system, not just like a specific program. And I think along with that, there can be a lot that goes into that for frontline staff. And so we've listed some of the trainings that we think are really important and that we work to provide to our staff to make sure that they're equipped as that front door to the homeless system. It might be, one of the first points of contact someone experiencing a housing crisis is having. And oftentimes that person is, potentially in a really traumatic situation, in a very scary situation. And so we want to make sure staff is equipped to do that in a trauma-informed way, to provide good support to folks. So really that client side of work, but then I think for our intake staff, there's also a significant amount of data entry and kind of detailed processes that people need to know. And so it's really important to have good training and procedures to support that side of the work as well. So I'd say that's one side of things, right? Like just operating coordinated entry, it's a big consideration of thinking about training and staff support to be able to do that work. And then I think the other side of training that's important to think about is the role CAM plays in the community and how CAM can support kind of communication and training with partners so that folks can accurately refer people to CAM and provide accurate information. I think in particular, as new homeless service providers are coming online with new projects, CAM often is playing a role in helping to orient them to coordinated entry and to kind of the local system and how that works. And I think there's a lot of ongoing just like coordination with providers and time on everything that kind of goes into CAM on a day-to-day basis on that side. And then also just I'd say there's a fair amount of like kind of one-off trainings, maybe someone from like a library wants to know more about CAM, and we've tried to support that by doing community presentations and providing information. You can go to the next slide, please. I think one slide back.
Sorry, Scott, which slide are we looking for here?
I think there's one COC participation before that.
Is there? Okay, I don't know why. There we go.
Thank you, Amanda.
Sorry, everyone. All right.
Okay, so I think another aspect of coordinated entry that's important to be aware of in CAM's role is CAM is really deeply involved in kind of the system level work of the COC and the homeless response system, both as a participant in sitting on a lot of boards and committees. And then I think it's also important to kind of recognize that CAM is governed by the COC, and there's structures in place to oversee how coordinated entry works locally. So like all the things we've spoken to, right, in terms of prioritization and referrals and access, like the whole model of CAM isn't just at the discretion of the lead agency. That's really, CAM is the coordinated entry system for the COC. And so CAM is working really closely on the COC level in terms of everything that goes into that. And so on here, you can see a few of the core areas where that happens. So CAM is sends a representative to the board. CAM has traditionally planned and facilitated CAM governance committee, which is the COC committee that provides oversight and guidance to coordinated entry in Detroit, including bringing policy recommendations to the board if there's changes to the policies and procedures for CAM. CAM also has an internal work group where we coordinate really closely with our implementing partners. So currently that would be Southwest Solutions and Community and Home Supports. We have regular meetings on more of kind of like a process level to make sure the work's happening in the way it needs to be. We also participate on the provider work groups. As we've spoken to a lot, we partner with all the providers across the systems. And so the work groups are one kind of formal space where that can happen to address issues, to if there's changes to CAM, to bring those to the work groups for feedback, to just, work collaboratively together in those partnerships. And then there's more. Other areas where CAM is participating and supporting work you can see on the board. So I'd say really throughout the whole COC committee structure and areas of work, because coordinated entry is so integral to the homelessness response system, I think it's really important for the CAM lead to be at the table in these conversations. So some of these are areas where CAM is running the meeting. So like PSH consult, CAM lead puts together the case conference list and really runs that meetings. Other areas we're more just at the table to bring the perspective of coordinated entry into work together. So happy to answer more questions if folks have them about that, but really wanted to speak to kind of the breadth of, I'd say, CAM's partnership in kind of that systems level work and coordination. And I believe I'm passing it over to Katie to speak to YHDP.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. Yes, so I just want to use my time with you all just to set the stage a little bit to make sure in case anyone has questions about what YHDP is. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what YHDP is and how that's shown up here in our community. And then I'm going to turn it actually back over to Scott to talk a little bit about what the specifics of YHDP look like for CAM and some of our expectations for the CAM lead agency around YHDP. So in case anyone has not heard of it, YHDP stands for the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program. It is ultimately, it's a grant opportunity from HUD for communities to receive funding to support their local efforts to address youth homelessness. But I like to think of it both as a grant opportunity and a community process. So in addition to applying for the funding and receiving the funding, whenever communities receive YHDP funding, it launches them into a strategic planning process to develop really a robust and comprehensive plan to end youth homelessness in your community. And that plan is called a coordinated community plan. And our CAM lead agency, our coordinated entry team really have been active in this YHDP work from the beginning, from helping our system get data to being a part of the planning efforts. And then you'll also see, we'll go into some discussions too around YHDP has impacted some of the things we do in our coordinated entry system. And there are some specific roles in this YHDP work assigned to our coordinated entry team. So we can go to the next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time here on this. These slides will be available for you all to look through more thoroughly. And I'm also actually going to pop a document into the chat that gives an overview of YHDP. So you have access to kind of explore and understand YHDP in more depth. But this slide just gives a summary of kind of the YHDP process in our community. Some things I'll highlight are we've been working on YHDP for over a year at this point. We're nearing the 2-year mark. We started applying in May of 2021, May of 2021. And then were awarded in September of 2021, have been doing some community planning really since that September 2021. And we're aiming for our projects to ramp up in April of this year, April 2023. So they'll start serving clients. So we'll be partnering with the current CAM lead agency to support those projects and receiving referrals. And then that baton will kind of be passed to you all once the projects are already underway. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I put this slide here. This is the vision to end youth homelessness. This is the vision that's really driven the work that we've done with YHDP. This vision was developed by our Youth Action Board. It was 100% written by youth in our community. And I just really wanted to share this with you all because this is something that I think we are asking the Youth Action Board and the COC as a whole is asking for the new lead agency to be willing to embody this vision as you step into this YHDP work, which is really to center youth in the work that we're doing, to continue to value youth voice, to be flexible and adaptive, and to approach this work through an equity lens, and to really partner with youth in our community to ultimately achieve our collective goal, which is to end youth homelessness in a way that centers the dignity of youth. And we recognize that, you know, youth is just one population that our system serves, but really some of the aspects of this vision can carry on into the full work as well, and thinking about just like the centering of clients and the ways that we make decisions as a system, really trying to assess and make sure our system is responsive to input that we receive from clients. And whenever we hear things from clients that say things aren't working, how flexible are we? How able are we to pivot? And so these are just some of the qualities that we would really love to see the new lead agency be willing to lean into and embody within our community. We can go to the next slide. So this last slide here is just really to show you kind of how our community has divvied out the funding that we received for YHDP. We were awarded $5.7 million. That $5.7 million is to be spent over 2 years. And this slide kind of shows the various projects that that funding was allocated to. And I've bolded here for you that there was funding set aside for coordinated entry to do some kind of specific pieces of work around YHDP. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Scott now to talk to you a little bit more in depth about what that specific work that our coordinated entry team is doing.
Thanks, Katie. So picking up where Katie was leaving off, just with the funding aspect of what CAM is doing with YHDP, as Katie indicated, there's a fairly significant investment in coordinated entry through the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program. So that $500,000+ over 2 years is currently being split between the CAM lead agency and CHS as the CAM implementing partner, with the goal of having 4 full-time staff to be hired through that funding. So on our side, as the lead agency, we currently don't have staff in these roles, but there is funding for a youth-focused eligibility specialist. So I think we heard throughout the YHD planning process and the coordinated community plan that Katie spoke to, that making sure youth have access to the system in a way that is youth focused is really important and understands the unique needs of youth. And so the goal is to have a staff person who can bring that expertise to really help make CAM more accessible for youth, and work closely with youth partners to provide that access. Additionally, the goal is to have a youth by name list coordinator. So as I was speaking to the by name list work earlier, recognizing that to be able to end youth homelessness, we need to know how many youth are currently experiencing homelessness and track that in real time and coordinate as a system to work towards those goals and the vision that Katie spoke to. And so this person would really play that role of connector, data management, to support those larger system goals. And then I won't speak too much to the work on CHS because that's outside of the scope of the lead agency, but I do think it's helpful to know there is coordinated entry funding there as well that's supporting youth-focused navigation and street outreach. So then in addition to those core positions, I think we've also been working really closely through the YHDP planning process to figure out not just what we do with the money, but how can we make policy, system changes, new partnerships to move towards that vision of ending youth homelessness. And so I think one of those areas is figuring out how we can better identify youth who are experiencing homelessness. So one initiative we're doing is mobile assessment, which is kind of a term we use just internally at the CAM lead. I don't know if it's the best term, but really the idea is to figure out ways to meet youth where they're at, rather than them necessarily presenting to CAM. I think we've heard from youth partners that there has just historically been challenges in those areas. So currently we have kind of an online form we've developed in a partnership with Ruth Ellis, Detroit Phoenix Center, and Sur Metro. So as they're encountering youth who need to connect with CAM, we can have a direct mechanism for those providers to help facilitate that by contacting us. I think ideally, in the initial vision we had when we have that youth-focused access staff, we could also be on site at these partners to really meet youth where they're at. Additionally, we're also working on coordinating with youth-specific outreach providers. So there's 2 youth providers who get funding through the runaway and homeless youth grants that are separate from our regular outreach teams. And so we want to continue to strengthen those partnerships to make sure youth can be identified and connected to the services they need. And then we're also working on coordinated entry process and policy changes. We actually developed a proposal in coordination with the YHDP planning group that was brought to the board earlier this month and approved to add additional youth-specific assessment questions. So yesterday in particular, we spoke quite a bit about assessment. We do use already the TASPIT app, which is a youth-specific tool, but recognizing that our current assessment definitely might miss some elements of experiences that are unique to young people experiencing homelessness. And so we've worked to develop a youth-specific assessment with additional questions that will be asked. And that will tie then also to changes to the prioritization for youth. So there's specific youth prioritization factors in place now, including kind of like a history of system involvement if young people have encountered the juvenile justice or child welfare systems, as well as looking at if there's a history of homelessness as a minor under 18, to consider that in the prioritization as well. And then as I spoke to, we also then are working to build out the youth by name list to really have kind of, a youth focused tracking and system to support young people who are experiencing homelessness. And then I think we also identified quite a few areas for future work. I think the CAM transition has slowed some of these down, and also some of these areas are just big pieces of work that will have to play out over time. So I think we've heard really consistently from young people and from youth service providers the need to reevaluate the assessment tool that's used by coordinated entry. I think that will be kind of a system level process to potentially change how we do assessment here in Detroit and switch to a new tool potentially. Also that there's a big need for greater cross systems coordination, in particular with the juvenile justice system, foster care system, the child welfare system, so that we can better coordinate with those systems to make sure young people are getting the supports they need and the access they need. I think additionally with the by name list, we really want to not just have the list, but actually use that information and data to support the case conferencing and coordination that would go into moving things forward for young people to get housed quicker. There's also, through the YHDP project funding, an ability to serve category 2 households, which is very different than regular COC funding. So I think that's an area of potential exploration of what that could look like. And I think we've also just generally heard through this planning process a desire to strengthen kind of on the ground community-based connections. There's a ton of organizations doing youth work in Detroit that I think CAM and the homelessness system more generally could work to better connect with and partner with. And I think I'll turn it over to Ed now to speak to some of our other partnerships.
So yeah, the first one I want to talk about is Detroit at Work. This is something that we've partnered with them, I want to say, for about the last 3 years or so. It is providing employment referrals over to clients for workforce development. So for those who don't know much about Detroit at Work, they help with general resume building, job training, job education, just that general workforce stuff. So we complete this initially through a process in Salesforce on our intake form, which is just seeing if the client is open for a possible referral over to Detroit at Work. If they are, we give the client the information at the end of each month. A report is ran that we send over to Detroit at Work with client, or phone number, contact information for them to follow up. So the client can either go on their own, by themselves, and Detroit at Work will follow up with them. So McKinney-Vento is another process another partnership that we formed with. Previously it was handled by Wade Metro. Right now, the process is halted, but will begin again. So this is done for anybody 26 and younger. It's a short 5-question assessment in HMI, sub-assessment HMIS, for any clients that are getting sent to shelter for that may still need services around school. So majority are for children entering shelter with head of household, but we also do plenty for youth from 18 to 24, and it does go up to 26. So McKinney-Vento can help provide clothing, after school activities, transportation, school lunches, different things like that, help you get back enrolled. A lot of just great things that the families that we serve, families and youth that we serve, need. So for informal partnerships, these are, and I know Scott kind of touched on it a little bit ago, of places outside, the COC contacting homeless services that may have somebody experiencing homelessness. So for example, we work closely with Red Cross via email, that they contact a lot of people who may be, recently experienced a fire of some sort, and they now need shelter because the hoteling may be done. Detroit area agency on aging, we work closely with people who send emails, phone calls, different things like that. Definitely the mental health providers within the city of Detroit and even outside a lot. We get a lot of calls from Macomb County, Oakland County, we get calls from everywhere. The hospitals within the city, the justice system. So a lot of these, there's a lot of cash bail bonds, places that we work with, that we created a form for individuals who may be exiting the city, getting bailed out, but before they can that bail can be posted, they need to have a place that they can go. So they fill out the form, and we look for potential, shelter for them somewhere within. And then of course, just different community groups without the city. It really is just kind of everywhere. We do presentations for anybody that asks, really, just kind of, get our name out there and just let everybody know the services that we do and do not offer. So it could be from anywhere. And, different agencies regularly contact us that are new to us, that we work with. And I think I'll pass it over to Elise now.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Ed. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be discussing the structure of CAM, as well as introducing several topics related to both the current staffing and future staffing projections. But to start, we wanted to address the structure of CAM and how it operates as an entity within an entity. And we've sort of mentioned this terminology earlier today and in yesterday's workshop, but just wanted to explain that we use this terminology to explain how CAM functions within the lead agency, but how it's also separate from the functions and other operations of that agency. So it's important to note that CAM is really, the front door to our system, and it's serving the entire community. And while the mission of the lead agency might closely align with CAM, there are still some slight differences that need to be managed. So operating as an entity within an entity, CAM would need to have not only dedicated staffing, but also other resources such as computers, equipment, and other technology. And we also really wanted to address the importance of managing any potential conflicts of interest that might arise from this structure. For example, if your agency operates its own projects, which might receive referrals from CAM, they would need to be prepared to have structures in place that would ensure the referral process remains fair and objective. So the lead agency should have policies and procedures developed and in place in order to address how internal referrals are managed in order to mitigate any of those potential conflict of interest concerns. So we're really stressing this entity within an entity structure as it does have implications for how the lead agency manages CAM, as well as what is necessary in order to ensure that CAM operations are functioning smoothly with the appropriate staffing and resources, as well as those mechanisms in place to maintain that structure. And you can go ahead to the next slide. And we are going to go into greater depth about the staffing, but we wanted to elevate this particular piece about our interview requirements. So as we've mentioned, we're currently in the process of developing the RFQ, which has not been released, but we wanted to highlight one piece of note in the RFQ that has been identified, which addresses the current CAM staff. We're calling this to attention to have an opportunity to highlight the potential benefits that we see coming from this point. So we do plan to affirm that all current CAM staff be offered an interview by the new lead agency after it's identified. And it will be their choice whether or not to accept that interview offer, but we are going to ask that that be provided to them. And this is really because, you know, current CAM staff have invaluable on-the-ground experience and knowledge that is incredibly useful and can be very beneficial to the new lead agency. And we wanted to highlight the benefits of including those staff within this transition. Current CAM staff have institutional knowledge and a really deep understanding of CAM functions, their core work and mission. Additionally, transitioning CAM staff could help to accelerate the transition process, as well as reducing training needs, and also potentially assisting in training and onboarding of other new staff. So just wanted to take a moment to note why we're including this interview caveat in our discussion of staffing, and to note the benefit of CAM staff, as well as how this is really an excellent opportunity for the new lead agency to gain that institutional knowledge and support. Okay, so this slide is somewhat straightforward, but I do want to note that it's based on several assumptions that we've drawn, not only from reviewing data, call volumes, number of client interactions, but also the current CAM staffing structure. So we've built out the staffing structure to demonstrate the potential staffing needs for optimal service delivery of the hybrid model, which has been sort of the model that's been identified by the community as what is most desirable to respond to the community's needs. So again, this is not a set number requirement, but rather what we've identified as being optimal level of staffing. And we've broken these staffing needs down into role type, also identifying potential additional staffing needs such as administrative and security staff, so that you can get a more complete picture of what this staffing structure could look like. I know that we discussed yesterday having a look at the current CAM organizational chart and going into a little bit greater depth on what those particular roles entail. So I'm going to turn it over to Ed to give us a little bit more information on their current structure.
Yeah, so currently we have it set up with a CAM manager and then an assistant manager, and 2 supervisors. So I'm going to start with intake and the reason for at least 2 supervisors. So I would say with the current 2 supervisors and the amount of staff, we're okay. It really depends on the next agency. I think depends to set up with access and need for potentially another one in access. So access does have quite a bit going. You got the day-to-day operations, which depending on the amount of people and how many sites you may be running with the phone line, it can be quite a bit. So currently we have 7 eligibility specialists under each intake supervisor. So like, for example, one intake supervisor is like the head of the prevention, relocation, diversion side. The other supervisor focuses on data and quality elements internally. So the 7 eligibility specialists on each team do complete the same job. They, answering the calls, making the referrals, diversion, everything like that. The intake site coordinators, we currently have 2. So they, one's main position is to help operate day-to-day operations, both are to do day-to-day operations, but one focuses on our navigation scheduling. So they schedule everybody in Salesforce to be seen by CHS, making and following the HMIS workflow that's necessary for that. The other one works on larger data projects that we get that come in left and right from different places that we may need to create or get done. So she's usually working on those. So we do have 2 positions currently that we haven't staffed for. One would be the YHDP specialist, which Scott spoke about earlier, and then a diversion specialist, which would be focusing more on diversion, while strictly on diversion of families and in-shelter diversion for family shelters. So on the other side of things is our IT information management side of things, systems. So these we kind of consider this back office. So I know when a lot of people think CAM is access, so that's kind of the front of CAM, but on the back end is our information management specialist, and they really do a lot of things. So we have 2 staff that are designated to HCV housing resources needs. So completing applications, research, EHVs, moving up, and going all the meetings and setting those up as they go. We have a referral coordinator who makes referrals based on openings when providers request them to PSH or rapid rehousing, security deposit requests, and transitional housing. We got 2 data systems specialists, and so we have one person that's kind of focused on our CE coordinated entry data, and then another person focused on various different data tasks. Then we got our by name list coordinators, so chronic by name, youth by name, and veteran by name. I would definitely suggest that these are separated as different people with the amount of work, specifically the veteran for sure, but they all have, should be their own position so that focus can be on all of them. And then finally, actually that's everybody. So that's our current staffing structure. And just with a lot, I would just reiterate the data amount, the data components that go along with this. The more that you get people focus on those, the easier it becomes. Doing back data entry can be difficult, and I'm figuring out. So that's my part.
Thanks so much, Ed. So just to kind of wrap us up today, we have some resources for a new CE lead agency to consider. So these are all going to be listed and linked in our website, just HAN-Detroit/CAM transition, and also linked here in the slide. So first, we have some questions to consider, topics like different technologies, key partnerships, staffing, physical space, conflict of interest, and really just kind of summarizing our presentation today and yesterday. Then we have, the LOI. We have an example of a past RFQ back in 2013. Some HUD guidebooks. We also want to make sure you guys visit the CAM website for their communications. And we also have some policies and procedures as well. So I will go ahead and hand it off to Tasha for the Q&A session.
All right. Thank you, Tori, and thank you everybody who has presented today. It's been some awesome information, and hopefully this has been helpful to you all who are considering applying. We want to now go ahead and open up the floor to questions. I know there were a number in the chat. Most look like they've been answered, but I think, Michael, your question around, can you share data on average call length? Katie, was that a link to the data? Is that what you were posting there?
Nope, that was whenever Tori was talking about resources on our website, I just linked to our website.
Got it. So, Scott, Ed, any information that you all can share on the average call length?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
So I don't know that we have it in an existing report. I think I certainly pull that data, but maybe Ed can speak to from the staffing perspective, like a general estimate.
Yeah, so that is, I know I've been asked that a few times. That is really hard to give because it really depends on the client, the needs. Is it a family? Is it a single? Is it a youth? How much we're entering, what we need to enter for each engagement. I mean, I can give you general timeframes, but it really depends. I know that it's hard to give. Like for a single, I'd say a quick engagement. For more season would be about 15 minutes, but somebody that's newer may be looking at 30 minutes, making sure all the data elements are in there. Families, I would say it depends on the size of the family. Really, it could change that time frame. I would say a family on average, let's go 20 minutes or so. Just like I said, it really depends on what needs to be entered.
All right, and anyone at this time, you're welcome to, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, feel free to do so. You can also continue to drop questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that.
Okay, I'll ask a question to Southwest.
Go ahead. Linda.
Hi. So I can see how much work this is. What were the final factors in deciding to relinquish? Was it COVID?
I think that would need to be a question directed towards Southwest leadership that Ed and I cannot speak to. I don't know if there's anyone on the call that can speak to that, or if that could be sent as a follow-up question.
It's okay. I just had to ask. It's a lot of work. I can see that.
I think broadly what was I guess I'll say this, what was broadly communicated to us at CAM was that it felt that operating CAM was no longer aligned with the overall agency's kind of mission and strategic direction.
Mm-hmm.
It was I think the words that were used for us basically were like a draw on resources that could otherwise be focused on other housing programs and other initiatives.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I can say from the notification to us, what we were told is that they had done some strategic planning, and they had identified through their strategic planning that they had some strengths elsewhere that they wanted to make sure that they focus their resources and efforts on those strengths rather than operating a CAM.
Thanks, Tasha.
No problem, Linda. So there's a question in the chat from Jamie. Will we be able to gain access to the current budget? I think this is budget line item, staffing, and staffing salaries.
I can answer this. So I think we do intend to provide some type of that information. We're still kind of working that level of detail out. So I'm sorry, I don't have all of those details to be able to give right now in terms of what we'll be able to provide. We certainly will provide, as we referenced yesterday, the total amount of funding that is going to be available to be transferred over to the new lead agency. And yeah, like I said, we're still kind of pulling together some of the other level of detail that we're going to be able to provide. So that is pretty vague.
So Amanda, the reason I'm asking this question is because we all know that when we complete budgets, we have to be able to manage what we take on, right? And also like certain agencies have certain indicators based on like expertise, length of time working in the field, like education and things like that, of where their salary aligns for what the work that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I'm guessing that like any agency that's taking it on, it's like you have to have an understanding if the salaries align with like your current agency structure and that, it's feasible, because you don't want to underpay people that are doing specific roles and responsibilities, right? Like for instance, the CAM manager would have to be aligned with probably, like because of the roles and responsibilities, would have to align with probably other leadership positions at the agency. And if that didn't, it would be whether or not it was feasible based on current funding structure.
Sure, got it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that is in line with I think some of the level of detail that we're hoping to be able to provide as well. So yeah, so you can plan internally so that comparable positions based on what I'm kind of hearing you say, expected education levels, expected experience level aligns with other similar positions within your agency.
Yeah, and it would be helpful to have like their job descriptions too. So like, even though that was a wonderful overview and I thank you for providing that, I mean, there's a lot of, there's a lot that I don't know, right? And I'm guessing other people on the line, other than me don't know this information as well. It's like, when you get like, a minute overview of a position, it doesn't really get into the depths of all the roles and responsibilities and the training and the requirements. So it'd be helpful to possibly have job descriptions too.
Yep. We'll take note of that.
To your question, Linda, about the PowerPoint presentation being available, yes. Today's and yesterday's presentation, alongside the recordings, we're also putting together a Q&A document. Those will all be made available. Anyone else with questions? Jill Bartlett, has the spending period for the YHDP grant started, or is that still in the planning and implementation process? So I could probably speak to this. So the grant period for the YHDP for CAM started in December 2022. So yes, it has started. Okay. It looks like Scott has dropped in some information in there related to Michael's question, so check that out.
I want to note Michael had another question too. I think Scott's response was regarding the call time. Looks like Michael also had a question for the optimal staffing levels developed with any additional funds that might be available beyond the current 1.3 million. So this likewise is something that we'll be putting some more detail in the RFQ for. So the optimal staffing levels that you saw on that screen, on that one screen, was it's a bit more staff than what we have currently experienced with CAM. Kind of optimal meaning the system, kind of our projections on what would it really take for it to be optimal in terms of access and referral and all of that. So it does include more staff than who's currently or has been, most recently on board with CAM. So this will be detailed in the RFQ as well, that there, may be ways we're going to be looking for applicant agencies to demonstrate what additional funding they may be able to bring to the table as well to help get us to that kind of optimal level of staffing. Natasha, I don't know if you want to add to that at all.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't even see that. Oh, I see it now. Thanks for catching that, Amanda. Yeah, so as Amanda said, the optimal level of staffing is not completely funded at this point. And so there are a couple of avenues that we are pursuing. One, and this was really something that happened at the very launch of CAM back in 2013, is looking for there may be opportunities where the lead agency can bring some resources that were not on the table. And so we definitely will be looking at that as part of the RFQ, excuse me. And then the COC, that being hand and some of the leadership within the COC is also looking into avenues to bring additional dollars to CAM. And so we're actually just we're having meetings, have some scheduled tomorrow to bring some additional resources. So it may happen where what a funding that was available in the RFQ differs by the time we're ready to go into implementation, because we may have more funders at that point coming to the table based on some of the discussions that we've been having thus far with some potential funders.
I have a question. This is Jamie. With the agency that takes on CAM needing to have dedicated resources for staffing, equipment, and other technology, does dedicated staffing also require you to have your own human resource person, your own IT person, like that operates separately than your agency?
So no, I mean, I think some of that was leveraged even currently with Southwest, and correct me, anyone from Southwest if I'm wrong. I believe some of that administrative was leveraged. I think, when we speak of dedicated resources, we're really talking about like the CAM staff, so like the CAM director, and that not being a director that is, 10% here, 10% there, 10% there of their time, but really 100% dedicated. And really all of the staffing that have some day-to-day functions with CAM, them being 100% dedicated. And their chart is up that you can see.
Yeah, and I pulled this up to you in response to Linda's question regarding the optimal staffing level, so that this is, and again, some of this is an estimate in a way. It's based on kind of our current, operations of CAM. One thing that, this is a bit of a side note, but I think that's going to be really important for the new lead agency to acknowledge and be able to embrace is flexibility and adaptability. Being able to adapt and adjust to the needs of coordinated entry in our community. It's going to change as time progresses. So this optimal staffing level that we've kind of projected here is based on sort of our current reality. This may change in the future, one way or the other. But this is really kind of at the point that we're at now of what seems to be, again, optimal. Thinking especially in consideration of, that access part of CAM, so that people can access the system in a way that helps them to get connected to kind of the next resource that they need as quickly as possible, and yet as, compassionately as possible, and to kind of help move them to their next step in their journey towards housing. So this, these slides obviously are going to be made available. This will also be, kind of fleshed out a little bit more in the RFQ as well.
Amanda, can I add something real quick regarding that? Because I know, like, with eligibility specialists, 20 full-time employees, especially with the amount of calls we saw earlier come through just through 3 quarters. I just want to add, while definitely more would be needed to capture all those calls, we kind of, like, when we were talking about this number, what an agency may be able to take on or possibly do. If it's more than that, I think that would ultimately be better, and definitely kind of, especially whether it's in-person access points or via phone, move things quicker for clients and definitely decrease the amount of wait time.
I have a question regarding the optimal staffing. So when you guys were considering optimal staffing, were you considering our current hours of operation, or were you considering expanded hours of operations? And if so, like what were those hours?
So at this point, I don't know that we were necessarily considering the specific hours of operation. I think it was, either Scott or Ed can certainly correct me. I think it was really considering the current hours of operation. If I would say, I think if an applicant agency wants to propose and demonstrate how they would be able to, provide hours of operation beyond what is currently provided, and how they would do that, what that would look like, what resources would cover that is something that certainly could be explained and described in the application.
Yeah, this was definitely just our current hours of operation. It's not extra by any means, because I mean, I'd really say during the day, especially, when we first open, is our busiest. So you definitely need more people on the front end, and we definitely slow down as the day goes on. So that the eligibility specialist is kind of what I look when we're talking about full time, because the other jobs can be done during the day or, a normal shift. But for eligibility specialist, that number may need to, go up possibly depending on, how many extra hours or weekends or whatever days may be open.
So was there any figure on and I'm sorry, I keep asking a million questions, but was there any okay, the current budget at CAM is just say 26 individuals, and this is how we fund this versus optimal staffing, and the difference in what the cost would be to get to optimal, what is that gap? Was anything done in that area?
Jamie, can you ask your question again?
Yeah, so I know that, I think yesterday, and Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said 26 or 27 staff or something is I don't know if that's the current budget, what was done in their fiscal year budget for this year or whatever, right? And then this has I think 33 and a half staff or something. So I'm just wondering if there was this is the approved budget for the year versus this is the optimal budget for the year, and what is the gap of funding needed to get to optimal?
Well, we certainly have some projections that we did internally. I think for the applicant that applies for this is going to matter on what your staffing costs are, right? Because basically when we say optimal staffing, it's just adding additional staffing. So you'll just do the math, right? To see how much, what, you would just do the math, and that will determine what that gap is.
I mean, I'm sure this has been provided probably in a different meeting. Is there a current number of each of these roles somewhere else, so we would know how many more of each of these positions we would need?
Yeah, I think it's on that organizational chart. Is it? Did we keep that on the organizational chart, or we removed it?
I think the only position that we put more people towards were the eligibility specialists. I believe, because I think it was 3, because right now we only have 7 for each access supervisor, but we did 10 for full-time eligibility.
Yeah, I say that was the one role that was increased. And again, because those are when we think about the access, thinking through people answering the phone, interacting with folks as they come in, that access piece, that's where those eligibility specialists are going to land.
That's helpful.
All right, anyone else? We've got time. And we're here to be a resource to you all.
I just have a quick question on this. What does this, I know you went over it, Ed, and I apologize. The site coordinator isn't supervising anyone, but they're just over the site. How does their role differentiate from the eligibility specialist?
So they do more project management, the day-to-day operations. So shelter openings, calling shelters, getting kind of more of that. The supervisors definitely assist with it, but it's kind of to field the calls from the staff of what do we do based on this situation and kind of lead with that. They also do like our scheduling for navigation and other projects that are access related that come up. So I mean, it's different things. Like I would say the main thing is they're kind of the go-to person on the day to kind of help, train and develop staff along with the supervisor, don't get me wrong, but just kind of do different daily tasks while the supervisor may be focusing on other projects rather than the necessarily day-to-day stuff. They're still focusing on that. I want to say that, but they're there to lead the team, I guess. I'd say team lead would be another way to put it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anyone else with questions? I see Scott is doing some checking to respond to a question that Michael put in the chat. So he'll get that information.
I'll say too, so I don't know that we had these exact data points that are being asked for. We did include some data in the LOI document in terms of volume for I think both all of the most recent calendar year data and then I think like the first quarter of most recent quarterly report that we had. So we did provide in that LOI document some information on volume, for lack of a better word, like the numbers of people accessing CAM, whether they were in person, whether they were phone calls, what that worked out to daily. So we do still have that LOI document posted on our website. I'm sure we'll have that level of data in the full RFQ as well. Maybe maybe updated if we have now another quarter's worth of data to include in it, but just that may be helpful too. Also, I think we did, or one of the links we have is to the CAM website, and they do have, I think someone alluded to this too, maybe Tasha, annual reports and quarterly reports that does give additional information on calls that they receive, what percentage of calls are answered, what percentage of calls are abandoned, so the caller hangs up. So some of that information is in those reports posted on CAM's website also, just if that's helpful too.
Hey, Amanda, do you mind if I steal the screen for a second?
Go for it.
Now, I've been having technology issues, so hopefully this will work. Are you all seeing the new lead agency consideration questions?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So this document is one of the documents that Tori mentioned earlier about some of the resources that are posted on our website. And for you all to kind of look over, it is definitely not an exhaustive list of questions. But what we tried to do, working with our CAM transition team and a few others, really put together some questions for you all to consider as you're planning for replying to the RFQ. So as Tori mentioned, it mirrors a lot of our presentation on like key partnerships and funding and data and technology. But it also, goes into maybe just a little more depth than what we went into in the presentation, because it's geared at getting you all to kind of think about how this would work at your own agency, right? So what we presented is what Southwest is currently doing, but this is also trying to get you all to think about how it fits with your own agency. So, we talked about stuff like maybe one thing that we didn't talk about in the presentation, but is down here, is around like physical space. So if you're doing, in-person intake, things to think about is, how much space is going to be needed, one for any new staff, but also how much space is going to be needed for intake and assessments. How does that space accommodate folks with disabilities? Do you have to acquire that space? Is it already a part of your organization, or is it something that you have to acquire? And if you have to acquire, what's the time frame around that? What's the budget around it? Do you have to do any build out for that space? Like, these are some of the things that you'll need to consider as you're planning for this, and also kind of keeping in mind some of the timeframes in which you'll have to be up and running. So I just wanted to share this document and just really point you all to some of those resources that are on our web page. Again, as a help to you all as you're doing your plans internally. And, thinking of things like some of the partnerships, for spacing, for example, spacing might be a thing where you might want to form a partnership with a agency that has some extra space. I think Cam mentioned maybe at yesterday's workshop is that some of their intake sites were at NOAA and NSO and things of that sort. So there may be opportunities to partner with community folks already. And so, but those conversations need to get started, right? And so just want to, again, point this out. Hopefully this will be a helpful tool for you all.
I have a question for Ed and Scott, possibly. I was just wondering, like, how many internal office spaces do you currently need, like, to operate? Because, like, even if we were to get up and ramped up, like, I just want to have an idea of, like, how many, desks and chairs we would have to have in places to put someone upon initial implementation.
Yeah, so starting with supervisors, I mean, we currently have 4, so 4 for supervisors. I don't know if offices or cubes or how it's set up at NSO, but 4 for them. And then our back office, our information management team is 8, I believe, fully staffed, right, Scott?
Yeah.
And then, so for our setup for eligibility specialists, we have meeting rooms. So we have, I think in the HRC right now, a total of 6. Now granted, we're rotating people in and out of the office daily, so not everybody's there. So with 10, 20 full eligibility specialists, if they're all in at one time or however, throughout the day, you'd be looking at needing 20 different spaces between sites at least. And then we're talking about the YHDP and diversion specialists also that we don't have. There'd be a couple more. Now I will add for our eligibility specialists, we also have I guess you'd call it a floating room, which isn't really like an assigned desk, but there's like 5 or 6 chairs in there for, where they may be taking calls. So we're kind of spread out. But I would say with what the possibly current staffing would be, around 30 necessary different areas, or in general, like I said, a floating room type thing where it's not really assigned.
I guess I would just add to that, we don't have, I wouldn't say, well, in the HRC currently, there's sufficient space, I think, if everyone was in the office at the same time to accommodate that. But other than the 4 management staff, which have like their own standalone offices, like all the other staff are hoteling with the hybrid schedule. So there's never really a day when everyone is in the office at the same time since COVID. So that, like for my team, for instance, with 8 people, there's like a fishbowl office with 6 cubicles, but not all 8 people would be there at the same day. And so there's like shared desk space. I mean, people tend to have their spots, but it's, and pre-COVID, which was a entirely different setup, right? We had access stuff that were at multiple sites. So I think it would depend a lot on like your agency's policies in terms of hybrid work from home, what the access setup looks like. And Linda, to your question, so currently we are fully remote in terms of like client services over the phone, but staff are still on a hybrid schedule. So where they're coming into the office, but they're not seeing clients in person currently. Previously, like earlier last year, we had like hybrid access services where we were operating the phone line, as well as people could come in, clients could come in person to Porter Street.
And does the CAM manager have an office as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And actually, Jamie, that was a good setup because I did want to circle back to your question that you had asked about the dedicated staffing. In that question, my response, I said, we're really referring to the CAM specific staff. One thing I do want to elevate though, that, it is going to be really crucial for that CAM director or, whatever you're calling that position to have some decision-making authority within the organization and also have access to the organization's resources to operate that unit, if you will. So I just want to make sure I clarify on that it's really going to be crucial that they have decision-making authority because things change so fast. And I'm sure Scott and Ed can confirm that, but things change really quickly. And Amanda talked about being flexible. And so that staff person is going to need to have some decision-making authority so that they don't have to run everything up the chain.
Thank you.
I also just want to, and you all can still feel free to, put questions in the chat and come off mute, but I'm also going to take this time just to maybe summarize some of the things that I've heard over day one or day two. Certainly this is not an exhaustive list, but a summary and really some of the key points that I want you all to kind of keep in mind, again, for your planning. So one of the things or some of the things that we're going to be looking for in characteristics of a CAM lead agency, and Amanda hit on this earlier, is really flexibility. And I can't underscore that enough. It requires you to be able to shift at the drop of a dime at times. It can be anything from like the way that referrals are being made. I know at one point we had to shift like how we make referrals based on acuity groups. So there's a lot of flexibility that is required in this. There are often new partners that come to the table. There are new programs that get funded. So YHDP is a good example of that. It's a new program that got funded. And so those referrals needed to come through coordinated entry. And so it just requires a high level of flexibility. And so if your organization is considering that, really take that into, or if your organization is going to apply for the CAM lead agency, really take that in consideration. Are we a flexible organization or do we tend to be rigid? Because if you know that you tend to be a bit rigid, this is probably not going to be comfortable at all for your organization's leadership, and it's probably not going to be the best fit. Some of the other requirements around like flexibility too is that, again, I mentioned earlier, this is a piece of our system. It is the front door of our system, and it's also how folks move through our system, right, Cam? And so because it's a systems level, the COC will be all in your business, to be honest with you. And I know some of you all may feel like that already with some of the programs that you operate. Maybe you're like, I'm so tired of the COC with these requirements around PSH and rapid rehousing. If you're tired of that, you're going to get tired even more so of how much the COC is in the business of right, of coordinated entry, because it's just so crucial. So you have to be comfortable with sort of like a co-governance model, and really being transparent and with the COC, because that's just what is required when you're operating at a systems level and not just program by program. There's going to require some adaptability for the greater good, right? And what I mean by that is, and someone I think mentioned this earlier, for the most part, your organization's missions should align with the work that the CAM does, right? But there are going to be times where there may be some conflict between what is your organization's mission and what the CAM needs to do, maybe what is best for clients, and not necessarily what is best for the processes at your organization. And so how are you going to deal with that conflict? And so you need to really think about that. There's really a need for orientation towards person-centered services. So there's so much access that you all are going to have with clients, and oftentimes, I keep saying they're the front door, but CAM is the first person, or the first contact a lot of times within our system, right? And so it's so crucial that first contact be a good contact, right? And a quality contact. So really needing to have that orientation towards person-centered services. You have to be a big collaborator here. We mentioned the informal partnerships, but one group that is not on this call today, but is very central to this work, and their names keep coming up, is Community and Home Supports, or CHS, as well as our street outreach providers. They work hand in hand with CAM. The street outreach providers are doing some of the same things that CAM is doing on the intake and assessment side for folks who are living on the streets, right? And Community and Home Supports is doing some of the navigation. So they're helping to get documents and things of that sort to move the person on into permanent housing. So you have to be willing to form those partnerships. We've got Detroit at Work at the table. We've got the McKinney-Vento. So collaboration is really key. Also, there's partnerships around population specific, right? So Scott talked about this earlier with the YHDP. They had to form some new partnerships with youth providers, but there's going to be partnerships with the youth juvenile justice system. There with the veterans, there is a process for the veterans, and there's a partnership with the VA and the Vet Leadership Committee. So collaboration is really huge in this work. And so again, that needs to be something that your organization is going to fully embrace. And then also alongside those partnerships, and we talked about this with some of the data and the technology, especially with the CHS, for example, there's a lot of coordination that has to happen, right? And so it's not always it's not always the most efficient to pick up the phone and do that, right? Some of this coordination that has to happen happens in systems that are outside of HMIS. So what does that look like? What does the technology look like that you all are going to need in order to make sure that collaboration and coordination can happen? The technology is also important because, as Scott mentioned, that you're managing the person really from the entry point to the exit point and wanting to know where they are at every process. And so HMIS may not be able to tell you that. And so what technology are you going to need in order to be able to understand that? And also to be able to make some resource-informed decisions. Some of the reasons why we had to change how we make referrals based on acuity groups was because we were able to look at data that we had from CAM and resources that we had and kind of pair those together to make some of those decisions. So those are just a few things that I just wanted to point out to you all. They've been said, right? But I'm just reiterating and summarizing those things because it's very, very crucial. I can't say it enough. You are managing a system. I don't want to overwhelm you all because I definitely think that you all here at the table, first of all, that you're interested and we're so glad that you came back for day 2 and you continue to remain interested. Southwest took this from inception to where they are now, but they had to crawl before they walk, So they had to step by step and phase by phase get this off the ground. They've done a lot of laying of the foundation now. They have a lot of processes that are already in play and things and institutional knowledge that we can borrow from. So we talked earlier about interviewing some of that staff. I mean, that may be a key strategy for you all because they do have a lot of that institutional knowledge that you will be able to borrow from. But they've laid the foundation. They put some of that stuff in place. So you don't have to build everything from scratch, but you are going to have to see how things work are gonna work within your organization. And Hannah's gonna be a partner in the same way that we were a partner with Southwest. So we will be walking with you along the way. We're not pulling out once we identify who the new lead agency is. We will be working with that new lead agency to onboard. We'll be working through implementation issues with that new lead agency. So you'll have, our support as well. All right, I'm gonna get off my soapbox because it is 1:50 and I want to at least save some more time, last 10 minutes or so, if you have any other questions that haven't been addressed yet.
I'm going to step out. Thank you so much. This is a lot to digest. And yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, Linda. Well, I mean, we definitely don't want to hold you hostage. We have until 2, but we don't need to take until 2 if you all don't have any further questions at this time. We will be doing some follow up, as I mentioned earlier. So we will share the slides. We will share the recording when that's available, and then also that Q&A document when it's available. Continue to check the CAM transition page on our website. That is continuously updated. So you may be able to find some of the answers to your question there. Also some of the resources that we posted. And so we will talk to you all soon. If, I should say, we will have another workshop when we actually release the RFQ. And so it'll go into, some specifics of the RFQ. And if nothing else, have a wonderful day. And I'm sure we'll see you all at another meeting because we're all in meetings together. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Tasha.